So you want to learn how to make Roblox GFX for beginners. 2021 is the year to do it and to finally wrap our heads around this complicated program called Blender. I know you can do it. I'm here to help you. So let's go. But I'm not fooled. My name is Nick Mabry, your 3D coach and professional Blender animator, and you want to learn how to make Roblox GFX for beginners. But maybe you've tried before, maybe it didn't really work out and you're not really sure why. Blender for Roblox GFX is complicated. There are buttons and hotkeys and weird terms like HDRIs and keyframes and renders, and I'm just trying to make my avatar look good. Why do I have to navigate what looks like a fighter pilot cockpit in order to do it? Blender for GFX is intimidating, but I've seen a lot of young creators navigate this software and be super successful in it. Shout out to Pam's Shot and shout out to Oralina, two great Blender artists that are doing great stuff in the Roblox GFX community here on YouTube. We are going to break down the steps needed to make a Roblox GFX in Blender for beginners, and I'll explain why we're doing this stuff along the way, because I think this is an amazing introduction to 3D art for young creatives like yourself. And I think that as a professional, I can add some value to this community and hopefully help you guys out on your own artistic journeys going forward. So there are 5 steps to making a Roblox GFX, but really, it's really only 3 steps. Step 0, gather our materials. Step 1, take characters and backgrounds from Roblox and put them into Blender. Step 2, set up our picture. We're gonna pose our character, put them in front of a background, and that's kind of the first artistic part of this. Step 3, set up our lighting, and this is the artistic part 2. And then step 3+, which is pressing the render button. And after that, you can take that render and put it into Photoshop, Photopea, Clip Studio Paint, whatever. Step 0. So, just like when we go to paint a picture in real life, right? We need to gather our paper, we need to gather our canvas, set up our brushes, our paints, all that stuff. It's the exact same with digital art. We need to set up our files and assets and characters, backgrounds. So that's what this step is all about. Here's what you need. So first what you need is Roblox Studio, which actually comes with the Roblox download. It looks like this little icon here. You'll also need the latest version of Blender, which you can download here on blender.org. I'll put all the links in the description below. Next, you'll need the appropriate avatar rig for whatever avatar you're working with. The avatar I'm working with has fingers, so I just went on the avatar article on the Roblox Wikia, and I scrolled down until I found whichever one had fingers and learned that it's called 4.0. So I just did a YouTube search for Roblox Avatar 4.0 rig, and I found this guy, Matt RBX, which he makes great rigs. So go ahead and download that. I'll have a link in my description as well. You may be wondering, what is a rig? Well, here I have our actual avatar, and over here I have the rig. And if I click on this avatar, all I can do is kind of move it around. I can rotate it as a whole thing. It's more or less a statue. I can't pose these arms out. I can't make any kind of pose to this guy. But if you look at the rig, even though it kind of looks like this ugly thing right now, if I click on these control curves, I can rotate it, right? I can start posing this guy using our rotate tools and stuff. So a rig actually puts bones into our little statue. It puts joints into it so that we can pose it and move it around and give it some more life. And posing is what actually makes our character look alive. But you can see an issue in that this one looks like our character and this one doesn't. This is just this kind of weird colorless thing, this blob. So we have 2 options. We could go into our avatar and we could add bones and joints and do a bunch of math and create all these curves, but that would take forever. Alternatively, we could just take the paint that's on this figure and copy it over to this one, like this. And so now we have all of these controllers, all of these bones that we can use to pose our character, and it looks a lot closer to our actual character. The only problem is with the head. So we're gonna have to swap these heads out, but otherwise we just saved ourselves quite a few hours of work just by importing a completed rig and painting it to look the same as our avatar. The next thing we need is a plugin called Load Character Light. So start a base plate template in Roblox Studio, And over here in the Marketplace tab, we'll hit this drop down menu, come over here to plugins. So now we're searching for plugins and we're going to find load character light. And here it is. We'll click that, install it. And now if we come over to our plugins tab, we have this load character plugin. We'll click it and here we go. And now you can type in the name of your avatar. I do not have a nice avatar, so I randomly picked this nice fellow. And so I typed in his name and then I'm going to say spawn at origin and then spawn R6. And there we go. You can click on that avatar and then hit F for frame. So that's how we frame our character. Now we're rotating around him. And we can close that plugin. And now we can start step 1, which is taking our avatar and our backgrounds from Roblox and putting them into Blender. Why? Because Roblox is designed to run on any computer and to run fast without lag. It's not designed to look pretty. Blender, on the other hand, is designed to make things look really pretty and to take its time. It doesn't care if it lags on you. Sometimes it doesn't even care if it crashes. What matters to Blender is that your image looks good, and that's what we want today. Over here, you'll see this Explorer window. Now this is important, and if you remember when I was showing off what a rig is versus what our actual model is, I told you that we're gonna have to swap the head. And in order to find the head, we can hit this drop down arrow here, and it's gonna show us all the parts that make up this avatar, right? We have pants, we have a shirt, we have the hair. We actually have this popsicle too, which I'm gonna wanna export separately. Here's what we do. Our rig already has a head, so let's right click on this hair and come down and export selection. When I export selection, you're gonna see that we get this file explorer window. And I have a folder that I named Beach House because for this project, I think I'm gonna use a beach house. I'm gonna do a beach house GFX. So I'm gonna keep everything organized in one folder called Beach House. And you'll also notice that down here, in the save as type, this is an OBJ file. And that means that this is an object, which is true. I mean, we're exporting a 3D model. It is an object. It's a little hair cap here. We're exporting the hair as an object. So that's all that OBJ means. It just stands for object. So I will name this hair and then save it. I also am going to want the popsicle as a separate thing. So I will export selection on that. Popsicle. And I'm also going to twirl up this arrow and click on my avatar completely. And I'm going to export that whole thing. So export selection. And then I will call this avatar. And the reason being is that when I export this whole avatar, I also get this texture file, this PNG. And it looks like this, which is very confusing, but it will make sense soon. And we do need it. So remember, the way to get that is to make sure you click on the name of your avatar, right click and export selection, right? It'll say OBJ, but it also will give us this texture file. Next, we want a background for our scene. So back over here in models, okay, over in the Marketplace tab, you can come over here to filters. And if you know the name of a creator, say on Instagram, that makes Roblox GFX backgrounds and sets like that, then you can type in the name of the creator. I personally do not know any creators that make anything for this, so I'm just gonna search Beach House in models, hit enter, and see what comes up. And I think this is the one I want, so I will click on it, and it just kind of pops up. So in the Explorer window, this is just called model, which is weird because it's a beach house. Well, Roblox Studio isn't smart enough to know that it is a beach house, but it does know that it's a 3D model. So it's just calling it model. And the way that you know that you're clicking on the right thing is if I actually click on the beach house, it selects my model in my Explorer window. So with that whole thing selected, I'll right click it and export selection again. And I will name this Beach House. And it will slowly export my selection because this is a pretty big model. Now we open up Blender and I'm gonna give you a very quick Blender navigation tutorial now. Quick tutorial on navigating Blender, super fast. Here's a 3-button mouse. You got your left click, you got your middle click, you can press in your mouse wheel like a button, and you got your right click. So put that mouse down and then click and hold your scroll wheel, your mouse wheel, the middle click, and you are now rotating around your object. Whatever object you're focused on is what you're rotating around. If you hold shift and click and hold that middle mouse button, now you are translating around your scene. You're panning around your scene, very similar to holding spacebar in Photoshop. Now, if you scroll in and out on your mouse wheel, you are now zooming in and out. One more time, middle click to rotate, shift and middle click to pan, and then scroll wheel in and out to go forward and back. Okay, we're back. So we're gonna mouse scroll wheel out, shift, middle click, and I'm just gonna left click and drag over all of this and hit X to delete. And if I click the delete, then it'll see that I have deleted 3 objects. So again, before we were talking about just importing our character, which is a statue, we can't move it, versus actually opening a rig and just applying that paint to it. So let's open our rig. Don't save changes. You can see my project folder here, and I also have this Roblox rig boy folder, which is where I save that rig to. So in the rig, type A, I'm gonna go faceless because our avatar already has a face, and I will open that blend file, and this is what I get, and it is exactly what I wanted, right? I have the rig now. However, for whatever reason, this rig file is not set up like a normal Blender file is. So if I go over here to this plus button, I can add a workspace, and under general, I'm going to go to layout, and that is what a default Blender scene tends to look like. So this is what we're going to continue to get familiar with. And the first thing you might notice is that I can't select these control curves, right? This is what actually composes the model, but nothing's happening. That's because I'm in object mode. And if I select a control curve, it's going to select that whole rig because it's treating that rig as one object. I want to hit that drop-down menu and go over to pose mode. I can also hit Control Tab, and that'll bring me in and out of object and pose mode. That's Control Tab. So I want to be in pose mode, and this is where we can use these tools here, our move tool and our rotate tool, to start moving stuff. However, this does not look like our avatar. We need to paint our rig to look like our avatar. And the paint for that is over here in our beach house folder, and it's this texture file, this PNG image, which looks like this. And looking at it, you can see that, okay, that's the face. And over here, well, that's his sweater. But I'm not really sure what any of this is. And I don't know why this is laid out like this. Let me explain it to you. So I'm going to cut this up and then wrap it around our character. So the first thing I can do is take the face. And if I can align it just right, what you're going to see is that that part of the texture was the face. And for example's sake, we could take the shirt here and we could put that in place as well. What happens now is that we rotate this stuff over. So I'm doing this pretty quick and dirty, but you can see how this stuff actually wraps around the character. And that is what is happening when we apply our texture to it. It's simply just mapped to certain spaces on this character. It's being told where to wrap around on him. So that's essentially what's happening. And this is just a sleeve, right? We can do the same thing here. And obviously Blender does a much better job of it than I do, but that is what's happening, right? We're seeing this texture file that looks like this, and it's just wrapping everything around our model. So it looks like it has a texture to it. So now that we know how that works, we need to figure out how to apply it to our rig. So let's go back to object mode and click on this rig. And now we're going to add another workspace under general. And this workspace is called shading. And it'll look like this, and you'll have all these crazy nodes going on down here. You can see these are 2 different windows. So this is just a middle mouse click that I'm using to navigate, and then the mouse wheel in and out. We're looking for a node called texture.png. And it has this little file folder, which just means that you can open an image and put an image in. I don't know what all these nodes mean, but I do know that the texture one is where we want to put our paint, our texture for our avatar. So I'm going to click open image. It's going to bring me into the actual rig folder. I don't want that. I'm going to go up until I see my beach house folder. And that is where I know that my Chutron 1 texture file, my texture file is. So I will open that image. And now you can see that our rig looks like our avatar. And I will switch back to our layout tab. Now, it doesn't work in this tab. It's just this gray thing. Why not? Well, if we look over here, this is how we display our viewport. And this window is called our viewport. So we have wireframe. It's just going to show wires. We have shaded, which isn't going to show us any textures. And the next one over will show us textures. So don't be confused by that, because it's really easy to forget which display mode you're on. And of course, now we have the issue where our actual avatar has hair and this rig does not. But if you'll remember, we were very smart before and exported selection on our hair. So now that Blender can read that OBJ file, we're going to go to File, Import, and OBJ. And again, it's putting me in this rig folder. So I'm going to go up, up, up. I'm going to go into my beach house folder and find hair.obj and import that OBJ. And Blender will crash. So a little aside, just now when I went to import my hair object, Blender kept crashing on me and I wasn't sure why. I was using Blender 2.91 and I just reverted back to Blender 2.83 and this works fine. I think the reason being is that whoever made the rig probably made it in an earlier version, 2.8 something, and the 2.9 version, just for whatever reason, just does a big old brain fart and crashes. So from now on, I've switched back to Blender 2.83. Sometimes the latest version of Blender is a little buggy. Okay, so we're back after like 7 Blender crashes. I've successfully imported the hair OBJ, but you'll notice that it's backwards. So we need to rotate this hair by 180 degrees. And there's a few ways we can do that. We can come over to this rotate tool and we'll get this rotate gizmo and we can kind of eyeball it, but that's not the most accurate. So I will press Control Z. And what I want to do is use a hotkey instead to be super accurate about it. So I want to rotate on the Z axis. And you can see this little gizmo over here will show you what axis is facing which direction. So right now the Z axis is up and down right here. And if I just started spinning that Z axis, the hair would, and you can see the colors match here, the hair would rotate. So let's rotate the hair. We'll hit R for rotate, and we want to rotate in the Z, so press Z, the Z axis, by 180 degrees, so 180, and then hit enter. Pretty simple. I'll Control Z and do it again. I'm gonna rotate R in the axis Z by 180 degrees. Enter. So that's R, Z, 180, and then hit enter. And now our hair is in position. But if I start moving this rig, right, if I select the rig, come over to pose mode, make sure I have a control selected, then I'll rotate it. You'll see the hair is in the right place, but it's not coming along for the ride. There's no relationship between the hair and this model, this rig. There's nothing constraining the hair to the rig. So let's create that relationship. Let's create that constraint. What we want is a parent-child relationship, which is really what these things are called. So this rig will be the parent, and anywhere that the parent goes, the hair should follow, because the hair is going to be the child. So this is our parent and the child should follow. So let's do that. With object mode on, we'll select our hair, and over here we'll come all the way down to this gear looking icon and we'll click that. You can see it says add object constraint, and we want to constrain the hair to the rig. So this is perfect. Hit that drop down menu, and remember we want a relationship, and we're going to select child of, because the hair is going to be a child of the rig. And we get this target. So what are we targeting? Well, we are targeting, in this case for the rig, you get a bunch of different options. I will just tell you now that we are targeting the body, because that is the name of this rig here. our actual control curves. And then it's going to ask us what bone we want. And that's really interesting because I've been calling these control curves, which is correct, but the control curves represent actual bones inside of this rig. So this would be, say, the arm bone, but I'm using the control curve for the arm bone. And over here, this will be the head bone. And I can confirm that by coming over here into our own little scene explorer, much like Roblox Studio, and hit period on my numpad. When I hit period on the numpad, it's the same as pressing F in Roblox Studio. We will frame whatever is selected. So when I press period on my numpad, it brings us right to this bone, this head bone. So now I know that we want to target this, because whenever I move this control curve, it moves the head. And likewise, I will also want it to move that hair. So I'll click back on the hair, make sure that I am, of course, in object mode, and select the hair. Now I have that outline around it. I'm already in this little gear tab. I have this child of constraint targeting the body, and the bone that I want to target is called head. So I'll click that. And as you can see here, I did it perfectly. However, it's obviously not in the right place, right? It's way out there. So if we click that again, come over to our constraint and just click set inverse, and that will put it back into place. And now, once we select our control curves in pose mode and start rotating stuff around, by the way, I'm just hitting R for rotate, we can see that it finally takes the hair along for the ride. So now the rig is truly our parent and the hair is truly a child of our body rig, and more specifically, our head bone, which is right here. Here is another very important step in file management. Much like I have this beach house folder that I'm saving all my files into, if we look up here, we'll see that we are directly in this rig file. And if we saved over this, any other time we did a GFX, we would need to re-download that rig. That's not what we want. So we're gonna go to File and Save As, and I'm in this rig folder right now, and I don't want that. I want to be in my beach house folder. I already tested this, but I am doing a beach house project, and I'll type in O2, because this is a new save for this project, and I will hit Save As. So now we're not overwriting that rig file. If we open that rig file again, it will be blank once again, which is actually what we want, because if we want to add multiple characters, we're going to need that rig file blank. Otherwise, when we try to open the rig file, it's going to look like this avatar. We're going to need to go into the hair and unparent that from the body, and we're going to need to remove this texture and all this stuff. If we had our background in, we need to remove that. So this is just a great way to keep your files nice and clean, right? We are working on our beach house project, so we are working in a beach house file, not the rig file. And of course, now we're going to want our background. So we can go to File, Import, OBJ, and just like we did with our avatar, we will find our beachhouse.obj and import it. Notice that our background doesn't have any textures on it. When we go back to Roblox Studio, we can see textures on this wooden floor, these seats, the tree, but we don't have the texture in Blender. We just have the colors. And that's something that the Roblox developers don't let you do. So Roblox won't let us export these materials over to Blender. And there are ways around that, but it is definitely outside the scope of a beginner tutorial. So we're just gonna go with it for now, and it's still gonna look pretty good, so don't worry too much about it. Now I wanna find my character again, and I wanna put him right around here, because I'm gonna want the camera here. I'm gonna want my picture to be right around here. And this guy's, as you can see, mine is underneath my background, but yours might be in the middle of your background. It might be inside of some geometry and hard to find. And the easiest way to find it is if we go back here, and remember, this is very similar to the Explorer window in Roblox Studio, but in 3D we tend to call these outliners because they outline all the objects in our scene. And yours might be a little complicated. It might look like this right now. So we're just gonna scroll around, and we're gonna scroll up in our outliner until we find boy rig, and we're going to click on that, hover our mouse over our viewport, this big square here where we view things, our viewport, and we will hit period on our numpad to frame up our character. Now we want to move this character back up to where we want to take that picture. And we could select the middle of this character, say, and try to move it, but we're just moving the geometry. We want to take the whole rig. And the way that we move a rig, if you'll remember, is using pose mode. So to get into pose mode, again, click on a control curve and then make sure you're in pose mode here. And now you can click on individual control curves. And of course, that one moves the arm. As we know, this one moves the head. We want the one that moves everything. And that's down here. This is our main node, our main controller. A lot of people actually call this the God node because it moves everything. So that's exactly what we want. And we can go back to our move tool and we can use that and maybe start moving it up, then scroll out. Oh my goodness, he's inside of some geometry and stuff like that. Or we could click on these little squares here and that'll move it in 2 axes at once. Alternatively, what we want to do in terms of hotkeys is we want to grab this character and move him. And if I hit G on my keyboard for grab, if I just hit G and then start moving my mouse around, this character moves with it. So I can just start moving around using my mouse, hit G, move him over, and then just keep moving my camera, hitting G, moving over, left clicking to accept that, and slowly using the G hotkey and then clicking, move this guy into place. And then obviously I want to rotate him around, so I could use this rotate tool, or just like we did with the hair, I can press R for rotate, and then in the Z axis, so I'll press Z, and then I can just move my mouse until he's pretty much where I want him to be. And now that we're a bit closer, I am going to use the move tool to get him a bit closer. And now that we've pretty much got him in place, the next step, and to me as an animator, the most fun step is posing this character out. And the way we do that, just like before, make sure that we have the rig selected, make sure we're in pose mode, and then click on the control curves. And we're going to rotate a lot of these. So I will use the rotate tool, but there's an issue with this right now because the orientation of this tool is off. And here's how you change the orientation. Click on a control curve, and then up here, you'll see orientation. Change it from default to local. And now you can see that axis changed, and it's a lot closer to what we want it to be. And now that we've changed it to local, our rotation points are going to be a lot nicer for us. Things are going to look more realistic to the character. So with my orientation mode in local, with my rotate tool on, and being in pose mode, I'm going to start clicking on these control curves, making sure I select the right ones, and I'm going to start posing this guy out to sit down on this bench. And I'll speed this process up a bit for you so you don't have to watch me forever. Also, it's very important to save. Okay, so I have a rough pose of him right now, but I do want to add in his popsicle here. I want him to be holding that popsicle. So I'm going to have to import that OBJ, find popsicle, import it. And once again, it's going to be hard to find this popsicle. So I know that the popsicle, if I look at my outliner, isn't going to be under boy rig. So here it is actually. And if I select it here in the outliner, hover my mouse over our viewport, and then hit period on our numpad, it'll bring me right to that popsicle. And here is something else of note. So you can see our pivot point here is down here. So if I hit R to rotate it, you're going to see it's going to rotate around that pivot point. I want its pivot point to be in the center of the geometry. So we'll select that popsicle, come to Object, Set Origin, Origin to Geometry. And now our pivot point, or our origin, as Blender calls it, is now in the center of our popsicle, much like what we did with our character. If we zoom out, we want to grab it and move it over to our character. So we will hit G on our keyboard, move our mouse, and then slowly, you can see it over here, slowly move it back towards our character. G, move it over. Adjust the camera. I will hit period on my numpad so I can frame around that, zoom out a bit. So now I'm orbiting around it instead of way out in the distance. Hit G, bring it over, adjust the camera. I'm gonna hit period on the numpad again, and then G, and I'm just slowly doing the same thing until I get this pretty much in between these two fingers, get it there. And then of course I will have to go back into this rig, into pose mode, go back to local. Like you can see that is not in line with the finger, but when I change back to local, it is. And just bring that back so it's not intersecting through the popsicle stick, right? I want it just touching, and I want to bring this back. So if I start rotating it, it's really hard to get that super finessed. But if I hold shift while I do it, it's a lot subtler, and I can get that just touching that popsicle stick. There, okay, cool. And obviously you don't need a popsicle at your forehead, so I have to move this arm again. But when I go to move the arm, that popsicle is not constrained to that hand. So just like we did with the hair, we need to constrain our popsicle to our hand, and I'm going to constrain it to this control curve, this bone right here. And I can see over here that it's called L.finger1-2. If I really wanted to make sure, I could come over to the outliner, press period on my numpad to frame up where I am, and scroll down until I see this selected, and I can see that it is indeed L.finger1-2. So with that knowledge, I'm going to go back into object mode because the popsicle is an object. And just like we did before, come over to this link icon. We're going to add an object constraint. We want a relationship between the hand and the popsicle. We want a parent-child relationship. And this popsicle is going to be a child of the body rig. And the bone that I'm looking for is L.finger1-2. And again, it will be off in space somewhere until we hit set inverse, and that'll pop it back. And now we have established a parent-child relationship. This is the child, the popsicle, which will follow the parent, this controller right here. So I will go back to pose mode, and because that thumb is following the arm, right? This thumb here controls the popsicle, but this arm controls that thumb, and therefore the arm also controls the popsicle. Now we have a popsicle that he's actually holding. So now I can finally tweak this setup here and get that popsicle a little closer to his mouth. Or maybe for the purposes of the silhouette, right, the outline or the contour of this character, I'm gonna have it out here, because otherwise I think that arm might be a little too foreshadowed, right? It's the difference between, like, you can look at my arm like this, which doesn't look so good, or you could look at it out here, which is a nicer silhouette, right? Here or here. I want this for my character. Now that my character is posed roughly, right? We might still tweak stuff, but for now I think that's pretty good. I want to add a camera so that I know how this is going to look. And remember, when I started this, I actually deleted the camera that was already in the scene, so we need to add another one. And we do that by hitting Shift A on our keyboard for the add menu. That's what the A in the Shift A stood for, is the add menu. And we're going to go down to camera. And now our camera is off in space. And so we can hit period on our numpad and we'll go right to it. But let's say we want to look through it. In that case, we press 0 on the numpad, and now we're looking through the camera. But here's the thing, once we move away from it, it automatically pops us back out. No matter what I do, it's gonna pop us out every time I rotate out of it. And I could, grab this and start bringing it out, just like I did with our character and the popsicle. But there's another way to move the camera that I actually prefer. So if we hit 0 to go back into the camera, you see this menu over here? If you press N on your keyboard, that's going to pop in and out. You probably saw this pop in and out a few times in the tutorial. So press N to pop it out, or click on this arrow here. Okay, then come down to the View tab, and under View Lock, we're going to check lock camera to view. And now when I rotate, the camera is locked to our view. So we're not going to pop out anymore. And I can translate, I can scroll wheel, and here's something very cool that I can do. If I click on our character and hit period on our numpad, with the camera, I bring the camera with us, we're rotating around our character once again. So it might actually be best to select his head and hit period, and I'm rotating around his head. And this is great because now I can much more easily get a nice framing on our character. And here's another issue, is that between here and here, I want to position maybe somewhere between there. I want this a little more finessed, but my scroll wheel zooms in large increments, so I can't really finesse it. So here's what we'll do. I'm going to come out of lock camera to view. Okay. And then if I take my mouse and I go over to the corner of our viewport, just above this options thing, you'll see my cursor changes into that crosshair. So it's a mouse now it's a crosshair. If I click and drag to the left, I'm dragging out another window. And now with my mouse over, I'll hit N to close those windows to give myself some more viewport space. So now I have 2 viewports here. With my mouse over this one, I'll hit 0 to go into my camera. Maybe I'll even make this, the separation between the two, a little smaller. See, just hover my mouse over the line between them, then click and drag. Now if I select my camera, hit the move tool, make sure that my orientation is local, because you'll see right now, these axes don't line up. But if I change it to local, suddenly it does. I can click and hold this, and now in this viewport over here, you'll see that I can really finesse this camera position, right? So I do want a little bit of this in the foreground. That means like it's closest to us. I want this guy here, and I want the background here. So for now, I think that's pretty good. Step 3, lighting. This is where the picture starts looking pretty and starts looking realistic. There are 2 ways that Blender can calculate our scene for us. There are 2 ways that Blender can present our scene to us. Eevee and cycles. Eevee is real time, so it guesses a lot of the calculations necessary, and by guessing, it's a lot faster, it's a lot speedier, there's less lag. This is actually how video games work. They use real-time engines. Eevee in Blender is a real-time engine. So Eevee, as a real-time engine, prioritizes speed over beauty. Cycles is not a real-time renderer. Cycles will calculate every light bounce perfectly. It'll calculate all your geometry, distances, focal lengths, everything down to a T, down to a science. It will be as accurate as possible, as realistic as possible, but it's going to take a really long time. So while we set up our lights, let's do it in real time with Eevee to make things go quicker while we work. And then when we're ready to make the actual image, to actually render our scene, we'll just switch over to cycles and we'll get that nice, accurate, realistic image. So let's add some lighting. First, I'm going to come over to this tab here, our render properties. And by the way, that icon is the back of a DSLR camera. That's what that's showing there, because the back of a camera is where you access the settings. So very similarly, Blender wants you to know that this will affect your entire image, your render properties, how the image will render, how it will look. We have 2 render engines, Cycles and Eevee, and I want to work quick. So I'm going to use Eevee, our real-time engine. And nothing really changes. And that's because, again, remember we have wireframe, shaded, textured, and our 4th one will incorporate our lighting. Right now it's dark, and that's because we don't have any lighting in here. So let's add a light. So again, I'm just going to deselect stuff and then Shift A for our add menu, Shift A for add, and then come over to light, and I will just add a point light. And let's do the old show where we hit G, move it over, click, G, move it over, hit G, move it over, period on the numpad, frame it up, hit G again, and we can see that this point light is affecting our character. You won't see it in this viewport because, as you can see, we're just on textured mode, but if we switch to viewport shading, we'll be able to see it over there too. It's not very strong, it has to be super close. If we come over to this tab down here into this light bulb icon, we can change the power of it. and we can just click right in the middle, drag to the right, and the power is going to go up and up and up. Or we can click it and then enter a value, say 3000, right? That's pretty bright. But you'll see that this isn't super realistic lighting. It is really just this ball of light. Maybe I'll just use this for the fire for right now. So I'll just position this, kind of get some cool shadows going, maybe like that. And I'll color this maybe a little bit orange. I'm actually colorblind, so I'm really hoping that's actually orange. I guess you'll tell me in the comments. And I think we could lower the power of this. 1, 2, 3, let's try 1000. 1000 might be good. Let's talk about more realistic lighting. Let's talk about a term you may have heard of, which is HDRI, which is a high dynamic range image. An HDRI is essentially just a panoramic photo, same as you can take with your phone, right, when you do this. And just like when we wrapped our texture around our model, like this, with an HDRI, it's like we wrap a panoramic image inside of a sphere. Then we put our camera inside of the sphere, and when we look around, it gives us the illusion that we're looking at a full scene. Let me show you what an HDRI actually is. So I'm going to open this HDR file in Photoshop, and again, it looks like a panoramic image that you would take with your iPhone or something. It's really nothing special going on until I zoom in a bit. And now, if I move around this image, it kind of looks like we're looking from the left to the right. We're looking at the beach, we're moving our head to the right, zoom in a little bit more, get a nicer effect, right? It looks like we're rotating. And now we can look at our feet. And we can look up, and it really looks like we're moving our head, right? It's pretty crazy. This is actually how Google Street View works, is it's just a bunch of HDRIs every few steps. So we're taking this HDRI and putting it inside of a sphere. And now when we look around that sphere, it's giving us the same effect as when we zoomed in on our HDRI and we started looking around. So that's all they are. To get an HDRI file, you can go to HDRI Haven, click on this HDRIs tab, and then we can start looking. I know that I'm going to want sunrise or a sunset, probably a sunset, and I want it to be on the beach. And now maybe I'll just grab this one. It'll take me to this page, and I'll just go ahead and download the 4K version of it. It'll take some time, but this will pop up, and then just save the file and hit OK. And remember to save it to your beach house folder so that everything is nice and organized. Let's apply that HDRI file we just got. Come on back over to Blender, and you're gonna see this little globe icon, this World Properties tab. We'll click that, and we're gonna say Use Nodes. And now with our color, we can click this button here, and we want to add a environment texture. Okay, so texture, environment texture, click that. We'll get this crazy color going on, and now we will open in our beach house folder our HDR file that we saved there, because remember, we're just trying to stay organized. So open that up. And just like that, we now have our HDR image. You can see, just like in Photoshop, when we start looking around, it's going to rotate that image for us. Not to mention, we got some free lighting out of that. So you can see our scene got a lot brighter. We can change that here, right? Make sure we're still under our World Properties tab, this little globe icon, in our Strength tab. So we can actually turn that all the way off. We can make it a lot brighter. The default is 1, not 14. And because I want this to be a nighttime scene, I can kind of play around. Let's say 0.1, maybe 0.2, 0.3. That's getting a little bright. Maybe I'll do a 0.2. I think that's okay. Now we are on to step 3 plus, which is the render. And before we can actually hit render image, there are some extra settings we need to go through. The first thing we need to do is switch from our fast render engine, Eevee, and remember this is in our render properties tab, this little DSLR icon, where we will switch from Eevee, the quick renderer, to Cycles, the slower but more accurate renderer. And the first thing you'll notice is that the hair is not rendering. Just select it, go over to shading, make sure you are in object view. You will see not 1, but 2 texture files. This one's plugged into the alpha, and alpha is just another word for transparency. So we'll grab this, click off of it. Now it's not connected anymore. And when we look back, we will see that in fact we can see our hair again, which is great. So now let's go over some of the settings that we want in Cycles to make our render go faster. And you don't necessarily need to understand why this works. I don't necessarily completely understand it, but we're going to check adaptive sampling on. So the next thing I want to do is add some depth and some blur to our shot through our camera. So to do that, I will go into our outliner and click our camera. Alternatively, I could just select our camera and then go down to this camera icon, and I'm going to check depth of field. And depth of field is how we get that blur in our camera. And let's set our focus object first. I will get out of the renderer here just to speed things up a bit. And you'll see this eyedropper icon in our focus object. And it works a lot like Photoshop. Click the eyedropper and then click on what you want to focus on. In this case, it says character 6. Maybe we'll focus on the hair or something like that. Basically, we want to focus on the face. So our focus object is now going to be the hair, which means that the hair and the face are going to be clear. They're not going to be blurry, but we still don't see any blur here. That's because this f-stop is too high. So if we go extreme and say 0.1 f-stop, we're going to see that things get really blurry. But again, because our focus object is our hair and our face, it's not going to get blurry. And I actually don't mind that much blur. I think it's kind of aesthetic. Maybe I'll do a little bit less, so I'm going to leave it at 0.2. Now that we have our adaptive sampling on, and now that we have some depth of field, right, we've played with our focus object and our f-stop, let's save, and now go to render and render image. You can also press F12 on your keyboard. You'll get this window here, and you can see Blender, using the Cycles rendering engine, is slowly rendering this. Square by square, these are actually called buckets. And you can see at first, there's a little static in each bucket. They're a little noisy. We can call it noise. And then Blender slowly fixes that. You can see that just happens right here, right? It gets a little smoother, a little nicer. And once this is done, you have your first Blender GFX all done and ready to go. You can use your mouse wheel to scroll out and see this whole thing. Our render is done, so let's save this image by going to Image, Save As, and then in our Beach House folder, as a PNG, we'll just call this GFX, and this is actually my second GFX render of this scene, so I'm going to call mine 02. You can call yours GFX 01, and save as an image. We're good. From here, there are many directions we can take. We can play with shadow catchers, transparent backgrounds, Photoshop edits, text effects, but that's kind of outside the realm of the basics, so I will leave it here for now. If you'd like me to make a GFX for you for free, just subscribe to the channel. Let me know in the comments that you want one. Give me your avatar name and I will choose somebody and I'll do a free GFX for you. If you're trying this stuff for the first time, I wish you the best of luck. I know it's not easy. I think it's totally possible that you could be working, accidentally hit a key, something might mess up, Blender might crash. It's not easy. It can be tough. If something goes wrong, just reopen your file and give it another try. Just because it's not easy doesn't mean that you can't do it. Guys, I hope there's a lot of value in this video. If you thought so, all I ask is that you subscribe, hit that notification bell, and come hang out next week. Until then, I am Nick Mabry, your 3D coach, and I'll see you next week. Bye. No. Oh, God.